No TV show in American history had the same beat, the same cultural heartbeat as Soul Train. For 35 years, it wasn't just a music show. It was a stage where style, identity, and a whole generation of music came alive. But in 2006, the train came to a complete stop. No goodbye tour, no final parade, just silence. And at the center of that silence is one story, a story whispered about for years. The famous scene that took Soul Train off TV for good. To understand how one moment could end a cultural institution, we need to go back to the beginning, to the life of the man who built the train and the legacy that rolled across America. Don Cornelius was born in 1936 on the south side of Chicago. His early life happened during a time when America was still divided by segregation. Before he ever stood under studio lights, Cornelius worked a bunch of regular jobs, traffic officer, insurance salesman, until one bold decision changed his destiny. In 1966, he signed up for a short-term broadcasting course. Within months, he was reporting the news at WCIU-TV, a small but ambitious Chicago station. It was there that he dreamed of something revolutionary, a program dedicated to the black community, a televised celebration of music, dance, and cultural pride. On August 17, 1970, the first local broadcast of Soul Train hit the airwaves. It was raw, energetic, and instantly magnetic. Within a year, it wasn't just Chicago's secret. On October 2, 1971, with sponsorship from Sears and Johnson Products, Soul Train went national. What began as a low-budget production became a phenomenon. Suddenly, America was invited to witness James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, and later Mary J. Blige and LL Cool J all on one stage. But the show wasn't only about music. It was about the dancers. The Soul Train line, 2 rows, 1 aisle, and endless creativity became a weekly ritual, a living runway of fashion and individuality. Rosie Perez, Jody Watley, Jeffrey Daniel all got their start here before moving on to stardom. Daniel would even teach Michael Jackson the moonwalk, a move born on Soul Train's floor. For millions of viewers, Saturday afternoons meant the same thing. Tuning in to see themselves reflected with pride. Don Cornelius wasn't just a host. He was a visionary. Calm, refined, with a voice like velvet. He carried a presence that made Soul Train unlike anything else on television. Cornelius believed TV wasn't a privilege for one group. It was a platform where all cultures deserved a seat. And in the 1970s, that idea was radical. At its height, Soul Train was pulling ratings between 4.5 and 5.0. It was the longest-running music show of its time. Brands lined up to advertise. Awards ceremonies spun off. Merchandise flew off shelves. Life magazine even named Don Cornelius one of America's 100 most important people in 1971. But even icons have shadows. And behind the glamour, conflicts were brewing. Cornelius was known as a perfectionist, almost militant about control. Dancers weren't paid, yet were expected to follow strict rules on choreography, appearance, even fashion choices. Rosie Perez recalled being told to tone down her moves when Cornelius felt they didn't align with his artistic vision. To him, Soul Train wasn't just entertainment, it was an image, one he guarded fiercely. Then came the music wars. By the late 1980s, hip-hop was rising, but Cornelius resisted. To him, the language, aggression, and themes didn't represent the positivity he wanted associated with Soul Train. In 1992, he said bluntly, "I don't want my show taken over by sounds that don't represent anything positive." It was a controversial stance. Young audiences flocked to Yo! MTV Raps and Rap City. Artists like Tupac, Nas, and Snoop Dogg rarely, if ever, graced the Soul Train stage. Viewership began to slip. By the 2000s, ratings had sunk below 2.0. In 1993, Cornelius stepped down as host. The baton passed to Mistro Clark, Shema Moore, and Dorian Gregory. They brought energy, but none could replicate the gravitas of Cornelius. The set changed, the music shifted, but the magic felt watered down. By the early 2000s, production was shrinking. Budgets were cut. Key staff left. Episodes per season dropped. TV stations started replacing the once sacred time slot with fresher, trendier programming. And then came 2006, the final year. On the surface, It was just another season. But behind closed doors, the train was falling off its tracks. Production crews were reshuffled. Don Cornelius, though officially retired from daily duties, still lingered like a watchful ghost backstage. And then came the day of the taping, the day of the scene. It was supposed to be a routine episode in Los Angeles. A rising hip-hop artist was scheduled to perform. Yet, from the beginning, chaos filled the air. The guest list was disorganized. The show started late. Representatives clashed with producers. The energy felt wrong. And when the artist finally took the stage, everything changed. The performance broke every unspoken rule that had once defined Soul Train. Costumes and choreography clashed with the clean image Cornelius had fought to protect. Visuals shocked the older crew members. Former editors would later call it a line that should never have been crossed. Backstage, Cornelius reportedly ordered the editing process to stop immediately. He called for an emergency meeting with distributors. Tribune Entertainment, one of the show's biggest backers, withdrew within weeks, and in less than a month, nearly half of Soul Train's TV stations had dropped the program. No announcement, no farewell. The famous scene was never aired. But in whispers, in staff memories, it became the reason Soul Train died. The train had stopped. But was it really just one scene? Or had the cracks been forming for years? In the next part, we'll dig deeper into what insiders call the cursed performance, the backlash that never made the headlines, and the hidden fractures that left Don Cornelius haunted until the end. To understand why that final taping in 2006 spiraled into infamy, we have to pull back the curtain and look at the slow unraveling that had been happening for years. For much of the 1970s and 1980s, Soul Train was untouchable. It was where stars were made, where style was born, where culture wasn't just performed, it was defined. But longevity brings pressure, and pressure cracks foundations. Don Cornelius had always been seen as a strict operator. He didn't just run the show, he was the show. From the angles of the cameras to the hemline of a dancer's dress, Cornelius approved it all. To some, his control gave the show its unique polish. To others, it stifled creativity. Former dancers would later speak honestly about the experience. They weren't paid. They weren't given contracts. Their only reward was national exposure. For a handful, like Rosie Perez, who would later choreograph for Janet Jackson and star in major films, the exposure worked, but for many others, it felt exploitative. Their youth, energy, and artistry fed the brand. While they walked away with nothing more than a memory, yet the deeper fracture came with music itself. When hip-hop surged in the late 1980s, Cornelius's resistance put him at odds with the very audience he once courted. For years, he had embraced funk, soul, R&B, disco, genres rooted in celebration and groove. But rap with its raw edge troubled him. He saw it as a reflection of violence, poverty, and division. He worried it reinforced stereotypes rather than broke them down. In a 1992 interview, Cornelius was blunt. "I don't want my show taken over by sounds that don't represent anything positive." That one statement echoed like a warning bell. The younger generation wasn't turning away from rap. They were running toward it. BET's Rap City exploded. MTV found new lifeblood in Yo! MTV Raps. And while Tupac, Biggie, and Nas defined an era, Soul Train felt increasingly like yesterday's news. By the early 2000s, the gap was undeniable. Ratings had slid to below 2.0. Advertisers pulled back. TV stations, once clamoring to carry the program, now questioned whether it could still compete. And the hardest truth, even inside the studio, energy was fading. Longtime editors resigned. Camera operators moved on. The production team became a revolving door. For a show built on consistency, the instability was poison. Meanwhile, Don Cornelius himself was retreating. Though he had officially stepped down in 1993, his shadow loomed over every decision. He rarely gave interviews, rarely appeared at public events. Insiders described him as disillusioned, even bitter. He believed the program he built was losing its soul, that new producers no longer understood what Soul Train was meant to represent. This tension created a powder keg, and in 2006, that keg finally exploded. The episode in question was taped in Los Angeles, like countless before it. On paper, it was routine. A rising hip-hop artist, dancers, cameras, lights. But something about that day was different. The guest list wasn't finalized until the last minute. Logistics broke down. Crew members whispered that the director's chair felt empty, that no one was steering the ship. And though Cornelius had no formal role, several staff members later swore they saw him backstage, pacing, frustrated, watching a legacy he no longer recognized. When the artist finally took the stage, the performance shocked nearly everyone in the room. The choreography was provocative, the costumes revealing, the lyrics unfiltered. To an audience used to MTV, it might have been nothing unusual, but to Soul Train, it was an earthquake. Longtime editors recalled shaking their heads. One described it as a violation of the DNA of the show. For 35 years, Cornelius had drawn invisible boundaries around what Soul Train could be. That day, every boundary was broken in a single performance. What happened next remains murky. Some accounts say Cornelius demanded the cameras be shut off mid-performance. Others say the full show was taped, but he personally ordered that no editing be done afterward. What is certain is this. Within days, an emergency meeting was held with Tribune Entertainment, one of the program's largest distributors. The verdict? Tribune pulled out. For Soul Train, that was the kiss of death. No distributor, no network, no TV stations. Within 3 weeks, more than 40% of stations had dropped the show. By the end of the season, the schedule was gone. The staff dismissed, and the show that had run since 1971 was over. But why did this particular performance trigger such a catastrophic response? Was it really about choreography, costumes, or was the famous scene simply the final straw in a long, slow decline? In Part 3, we'll uncover the rumors about what was actually seen that day, the so-called cursed footage, and why it has never to this day been released to the public. When fans speak of the famous scene, they almost whisper. Because unlike the thousands of Soul Train episodes that lit up American living rooms, this one never aired. No VHS recording ever made it into circulation. No rerun, no YouTube upload. What remains are fragments, memories from crew members, rumors passed between former dancers, and scattered notes from industry insiders. So, what really happened during that final taping in 2006? The performance, by all accounts, was unlike anything Soul Train had ever staged. The artist, whose name remains hidden in most insider accounts, was a rising figure in the hip-hop world. His team arrived with an entourage larger than the production crew itself. Negotiations about set design and timing delayed the taping by nearly an hour. By the time cameras rolled, tensions were already high. Then came the showstopper. Dancers stormed the stage in costumes far more provocative than Soul Train audiences were used to seeing. The choreography, sharp and suggestive, broke away from the smooth grooves that had defined the line for decades. Lyrics poured out raw and unfiltered, tackling themes of violence and street culture that Cornelius had once vowed would never define his stage. For the younger crew, perhaps it felt like nothing unusual. After all, MTV and BET had been showcasing similar performances for years, but for the veterans, those who had spent their lives curating Soul Train's cleaner image, it was a shockwave. One staff editor speaking anonymously in a later interview recalled, "It was like someone hijacked the train. Everything Dawn spent years building. The positivity, the pride, the balance was just thrown off the rails in a single number." The fallout began immediately. Backstage, Cornelius was reportedly furious. Though retired, he demanded the footage be locked down. An emergency production halt was called. Dancers and crew members were sent home with no explanation. Insiders would later claim that Cornelius stormed into a conference room and refused to let the editing process begin. Within a week, Tribune Entertainment, already uneasy about dwindling ratings, announced it was pulling out as distributor. That decision triggered a domino effect. Local TV stations, sensing instability, began dropping the show. By April 2006, more than 40% of Soul Train's time slots had been replaced with syndicated programming. The famous scene never reached audiences, but the legend of it grew larger with every year that followed. Fans online began referring to it as the cursed performance, the taping that ended the longest-running music show in television history. Why cursed? Because those who had been there described a strange aftermath. Longtime staff who had poured decades into the show suddenly found themselves jobless overnight. Former dancers spoke of a sadness that lingered. Even Don Cornelius himself seemed unable to recover from the fallout. Rosie Perez, who once danced on the program, called the show's sudden end an unnamed sadness.